Given that Illumination started with a movie about a supervillain, it shouldn't be surprising that there are plenty of Illumination baddies to talk about, with many of them able to rival the likes of Disney and Dreamworks in terms of evilness and showmanship. However, for most of Illumination's villains, things don't work out as planned. There aren't many villain deaths, but there are plenty of endings. So today, we're gonna rank them. Hey guys, I'm Brad with WickedBinge, and this is Illumination Villain Fates, harmless to worse than death. First, we have villains who didn't receive a punishment or had a completely happy ending. These are the ones who got off easy. First, we have Grubaugh. Beginning his career as a supervillain, Grubaugh stole Queen Elizabeth's crown at only 8 years old. He got away with this crime, as we do see the crown make a small cameo in the rise of Grubaugh, and Grubaugh continued to advance his criminal career. He'd cause minor property damage, mess with others, and mostly focused on stealing other things like the Times Square Jumbotron and a couple of different mini landmarks from Las Vegas before finally accomplishing his greatest feat, stealing the moon.
Dave, listen up, please!
Ultimately, Grubaugh got away with all of it, not really getting punished. Furthermore, he was able to transition from villain to hero after being hired by the Anti-Villain League, and he was able to find a family for himself with his 3 adopted daughters, his loving wife Lucy, and his long-lost brother Drew, as well as a whole army of minions. While Grubaugh had his struggles, avoiding the police or dealing with jail time has never really been one of them, so we feel he more than earns this spot on our list. Next, we have Snowball from Secret Life of Pets. Being abandoned by his previous owner, Snowball was bitter and hostile towards humans, wanting to destroy all owners so that pets could rule the world. With his army of flush pets, Snowball considered himself to be an evil mastermind, believing he could still pack a punch despite his super cute and fluffy exterior.
It's like a club, but with biting and scratching.
While he attacked the drivers of an animal control truck and tried to kill Max and Duke, Snowball doesn't really get punished for any of this. Instead, he's rewarded with a brand new forever home after being found by a little girl named Molly. While this happy ending might not have been earned, we're happy to at least see that he was able to turn his life around and try to become more of a hero. Next is the Bear Mob from the first Sing movie. While these 3 bears are ultimately minor antagonists, they still cause conflict for both Mike the Mouse and Buster Moon. They threaten to eat Mike if they don't get the money that he owes them, and then after Mike offers them the contest prize money instead, they inadvertently destroy the entire Moon Theater. However, they don't get arrested for this, and are instead able to just go back to their hangout spot for another round of cards, which then allows them to catch Mike's performance later on. While it seems like Mike and his girlfriend are going to escape at first, in the last scene we see of them, we also see one of the bears managing to hang on to their car. Given that we never see Mike in the sequel, we can only assume the worst, meaning that the Bear Mob ultimately got exactly what they wanted without any punishment. So hey, maybe crime does pay sometimes. Finishing off the section, we have the one and only Grinch. You'd think that trying to steal an entire holiday would warrant more than a small apology, but hey, that's the power of the Christmas spirit. Being a who-hating jerk, the Grinch spent most of his time being rude and grumpy, refusing to make any friends and isolating himself with his dog, Max. When the holidays became too much for him, the Grinch decided he was going to steal it. And when it comes to stealing the physical symbols of Christmas, he succeeds. But we all know the story by now, and once the Grinch realizes the true meaning of Christmas, he takes it upon himself to return everything that he stole. In the Illumination version of the classic tale, we actually see the Grinch try to humble himself and give a public apology.
I stole your Christmas.
It may not seem like much, but compared to our previous villains, it's still something, and still technically a punishment. Of course, it doesn't take much for the Whoville citizens to accept the Grinch's apology, and he gets to celebrate the holidays with others from that point on. In the next section, we have villains that were either arrested or transformed in some way, whether they be physical or metaphorical, like a change in status or something similar. These are the arrest and the transformations. First, we have Carlos from Hop. While we may sympathize somewhat with Carlos, as it can't be easy being denied a promotion just because of your species, we still can't deny all the evil he accomplished during the film, from attempting to overthrow the current Easter Bunny and wanting to hand out worms and birdseed instead of candy, to even attempting to murder both Fred and Mr. Bunny using a vat of boiling liquid candy. After finally getting his hands on the Egg of Destiny staff, Carlos is transformed into a bunny-chick hybrid, though despite his hatred of bunnies, he doesn't seem to mind this transformation humiliation so much. What ends up being his true punishment, however, is when he's forced to help pull the egg sleigh, losing whatever power he would have had if he had remained head of the Easter Chicks. While it may seem like he got off a little easy, losing whatever he had left and being forced to do annual physical labor instead is a fitting punishment for someone as power-hungry as Carlos. Next is Balthazar Brat. Having one of the longest and most impressive criminal records, Brat is more than just his gimmick and is pretty competent in his evilness, allowing him to almost kill Gru and his family. During the film's climax, once Drew is able to take out Brat's mecha, Brat and Gru are able to have one final showdown.
Dance fight!
Before Brat can use his keytar to blow him away, he and Gru have another dance fight where Gru is able to get the upper hand, snatching Brat's keytar and uses it to both blow him away and humiliate him, leaving Brat floating away in his gum while naked as ABL helicopters swarm in to arrest him. We're still putting this in the low end because even if he didn't get to accomplish his ultimate goal, Brat was able to cause a lot of destruction around Hollywood before getting shut down. But even so, getting humiliated and finally arrested after avoiding the authorities for his entire villain career certainly counts as a well-deserved fall from grace. Next is Aloysius O'Hare. O'Hare was a ruthless businessman, only ever caring about profits, and thus being willing to use intimidation tactics to threaten anyone who seems like they may be doing something to cut into those profit margins. But while he's the head of a company that sells air, something that everyone needs to, live, O'Hare actually doesn't have a ton of power. Sure, he has wealth and goons, but these guys turn on him in the end, after they and the rest of the town see O'Hare for how callous and selfish he truly is. With this, O'Hare gets strapped to a rocket and flown out of town. We had to put this fate on the low end. While it may be a villain's defeat, we don't know what happens to O'Hare afterwards. We don't know if he gets injured after his flight, if he gets arrested, or if he even loses access to his company. Heck, we don't even know what happens to the company right away, as it will likely take a while for the new truffula trees to start positively impacting the environment.
I say let it die!
See what we mean when we say that it's hard to really measure just how much of a setback this is for O'Hare? As stated before, it's still a fairly satisfying defeat, but we couldn't put it any lower. Now we have El Macho. El Macho, aka Eduardo Perez, had a pretty impressive plan, all things considered. With the help of Dr. Navarro, he was able to kidnap hundreds of minions, transforming them into rabid and incredibly dangerous monsters to act as his army. Once Gru, Navarro, and the girls are able to figure out how to turn the minions back to normal, El Macho decides to take the PX41 formula himself, turning himself into a giant monster. Similar to Carlos, El Macho doesn't seem to mind this transformation, which makes sense given that he's all about being strong. He's not invulnerable, as we see him get tasered and then later knocked out by Navarro's fart gun. While we don't see him getting arrested on screen, we feel like this is a given considering his criminal record. And with this arrest, he would also likely lose his restaurant, Salsa and Salsa, which was successful.
Kids eat free on Tuesdays.
Because of this, we consider El Macho's defeat to be much harsher than Brat's, since it seemed like El Macho had much more to lose. Next is the Vicious Six. Armed with the Zodiac Stone, these 5 infamous baddies likely could have been the rulers of the entire world, being powerful enough to defeat any ABL agent, and being armed with super strength and super abilities like extending fangs and fire breath. Their reign didn't last too long, as once Gru was able to get his hands on the stone and his minions gave him an opening, the junior villain was then able to turn the 5 villains into harmless rats that are then put into an ABL cage. We don't see them get turned back into humans, so we can assume that the ABL just kept the Vicious Six in that state to make them easier to lock up. It would already be a harsh fate if all they had to deal with was losing their power as villains, given how much money and fame they were able to make off things like merchandise. But all that, plus losing their human forms, thus making it even more impossible for them to break out, seems like it adds insult to injury. Now we have Sing 2's Jimmy Crystal. Jimmy was the head of an entertainment empire. He had riches, power, fame, and above all else, he had a reputation that he would do anything to protect, even if it meant resorting to threats and murder. While Jimmy was able to get away with a lot, his luck ultimately ran out after the second time he tried to kill Buster, which is when his assistant Suki decides that enough is enough and helps the police with arresting Jimmy. You could say that since Jimmy still has access to his wealth and probably a few lawyers, this arrest probably won't be too much of a hassle for him. So why is he still ranked here? Well, that's where the second part of this punishment comes in. After Jimmy attempts to take all the credit for Buster's show and tries to claim that the show will be performing again at this theater, Buster and the crew abandon him on stage, leaving Crystal to look like a fool. And he was humiliated and laughed at by the entire audience, which was essentially his worst nightmare. Even Even if he was able to pay off whoever he needed to in order to get out of prison, Jimmy's reputation was still damaged with his former fans, now seeing him as either a joke or an attempted murderer. So we can't really see his so-called entertainment empire lasting much longer. You gotta love villain fates that have an extra bit of irony. Finishing out the section, we have Scarlet and Herb Overkill. Similar to the Vicious Six, they were considered to be the best of the best and had fans throughout the villain community, in addition to all their wealth and power. That all changed when the minions came into their life.
Banana!
Banana!
While some of the minions' actions were accidental, it still resulted in the Overkill's home getting destroyed, Scarlet getting humiliated, and she and Herb both getting blown up. Thanks to her shielded coronation dress, the couple was able to survive and tried to steal the crown again, desperate for one last victory after losing everything. And this is where young Gru steps in, taking the crown for himself after freezing the couple solid. As Scarlet says, she was completely ruined by the end of the film, losing whatever power and influence she might have had. With nothing to defend herself with, it's likely that she got arrested by the AVL, and even if she didn't, she still had to deal with plenty of freezer burns and possibly frostbite from Gru's freeze ray. A very painful end for the woman who was once the world's greatest supervillain. Finally, we have the cruelest villain fates. These are the gruesome and the worse than death. For our bronze medal of gruesomeness, we have a surprising entry, the Once-Ler. You might think we're either crazy or just too sympathetic, but we really do feel like this is a section where the Once-Ler belongs, if we're comparing all the Illumination villains' fates.
Yeah, bad.
And if you doubt us, just imagine being in his shoes. His defeat might have ultimately been self-inflicted, but it was still an incredibly harsh fall. Once the last truffle tree fell, the Once-Ler was left penniless and without any friends or family in a completely polluted environment, stuck in isolation for decades, with the knowledge that there was only one truffle seed left, and it was all his fault. That's gotta be a rough life, being weighed down by all the guilt and loneliness. Though he technically helps give the film a happy ending, the credit for that mostly goes to Ted and the others, with the Once-Ler only being the one to supply the seed. Though this acts as his moment of redemption, it still doesn't take away from all the years he had to stew in his guilt and regret. You may disagree with us, but we still feel that this is one of the harshest fates that an Illumination villain had to endure. The silver medal of gruesomeness goes to Sergei from The Secret Life of Pets 2. Sergei was cruel and abusive, and is probably one of the darkest villains that Illumination has ever created, not being quite as campy or humorous as some of the others. For most of the movie, Sergei seems to have the upper hand, armed with a pet monkey and wolves, in addition to whatever power he may have as the owner of a circus. Thankfully, during the climax, the animals are able to fight back and attack Sergei. Though the cruel circus master does try to shoot them, he stopped when the cat lady hits him with her car. Not just once, but twice. Ouch. Similar to O'Hare and El Macho, we don't see what happens to Sergei after this point, but we could guess that he possibly either got kicked out of show business or got arrested. But even if neither happened, Sergei gets this spot for taking a lot of physical damage, something that, as we probably discussed, doesn't happen with many other Illumination villains. So, even if his defeat wasn't entirely satisfying, it's still gruesome enough for us. However, there's still one villain fate that tops it. Getting the gold medal of gruesomeness is Vector. While this may not look like much, Vector certainly proved himself as a villain throughout the first Despicable Me, and we think you all agree that every great villain needs a just as great villain defeat.
Oh yeah!
For as confident and cocky as Vector might have been, this proved to be his downfall when he refused to listen to the girls about the moon when it started to regrow, causing him to get ran over by it several times, which was painful, even before it returned to its full size. Though Vector tried to get the last laugh, he failed and ended up stranded on the moon, with a small airbag within his suit being his only source of oxygen. Despicable Me can be cartoony, but it doesn't take away from how harsh this defeat was for Vector. Despite having a small supply of oxygen on him, Vector's survival chances aren't looking too good. Getting on the moon doesn't have any food or water for him, not to mention the fact that space can be cold. Freezing, actually. Even if Vector's father was somehow able to rescue him, it would have taken him a while. Even if Vector didn't die a slow and painful death, he'd still have to go through a lot of pain prior to that, which, yeah, probably well deserved for a kidnapper and attempted child murderer. For all these reasons, we felt that Vector deserved the gold medal, easily having the most gruesome, non-death villain fate in Illumination. Alright guys, that's it. Let us know in the comment section if you agree with our ranking, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos, but most importantly, stay wicked.